All right. Hello, Ibiza. It is great to be back in real life. And I'm actually surprised to see this many people awake at noon on the island. So very impressive. Although if I know this group, some of you probably have yet to go to sleep. So should make for an interesting next 20 minutes. So Ben asked me to talk about the road to recovery for our industry, our community, our respective companies, our colleagues, and for us as individuals. It's been a challenging 2+ years, and I'm going to share with you in just a few minutes 5 reasons why I think that we will emerge from this pandemic, this latest shock to the system, not only successfully, but better off than we were a few years ago. But first, I wanted to share with you a personal story, and that personal story, next, answers the question, why? Why am I here? Now, this is a story I have not shared in my nearly 2 decades of working in this industry, at least not in this type of forum, but I figured it's a good time to share it with you today. So you might say, well, Rob, you're here, it's obvious, you run Beatport, and that's an important company in our ecosystem. Or you might say that I was the founder of InGrooves, ran that for 14 years, and then I even tried my hand at artist management, where I learned that you can't stop good people from making bad decisions. And while those are all valid reasons, it's not the real reason I am here. I'm here today because, like many of you in the audience, if not all of you, a large part of my identity between the age of 14 and 24 was formed on dance floors, primarily in and around New York City and London. Now, I grew up privileged, but that doesn't mean that I had any easier time figuring out who I was or who I wanted to be. And it was on these dance floors, at these raves, where I felt welcomed, empowered, I wasn't judged or criticized, and I was able to express myself in ways that I hadn't been able to growing up. And so that led me to be committed to a lifetime in this industry. So during my time in the nightclubs, a few too many late nights and early mornings to make my parents happy, I learned to DJ, and I fell in love with the DJ craft. So I bought my first set of decks, and eventually, by the age of 18, I secured my first summer residency. Now, it wasn't here on Ibiza. It was in a small club outside Boston, Massachusetts. Now, when I say outside Boston, Massachusetts, it was actually 2 states away, in a small town called Ogunquit, Maine. Now, you probably don't know Ogunquit, Maine. It's hard to say. But it was one of these towns that in the summer was, back then, gay-friendly. And again, this is 1992. And what does every gay-friendly town need in the United States? It needs a nightclub. And so this 200-cap room was actually attached to a Mexican restaurant. So I was a waiter during the day and then the DJ at night. And my DJ name was DJ Chaos. And here is a picture of DJ Chaos from the archives. Now, I speak about him in the third person because I don't want any of our investors concerned that I'm going to resurrect my career and go on tour. So I just tell them that DJ Chaos lives in a remote South Pacific island, and his artist rider is 5 pages too long, so nobody's going to book him, so there's nothing to worry about. But occasionally, he'll come back in his retro 90s hip-hop look and DJ for a friend. But early on, I learned to value that emotional connection that you can have when you're playing music for a group of people and they're reacting to it. And there's that, it's almost hard to define that love that exists in the room. So I was very excited about my summer residency, and I did what you did back then, which was I printed up about 400 flyers and put them up all over town, and I got home and put the remaining few flyers on the kitchen counter, and here's the flyer. As you can see, I am not a designer, but I do have this flyer up in my office to remind me where I came from. So, other than the fact that the music selection ranged from techno to reggae, obviously trying to appeal to a broad audience, the biggest issue here, as my mother pointed out, when she said, well, this is great, but who's DJ Coas? Whoops. So, needless to say, DJ Coas killed it that night and went on to have a fun summer, but I realized that my future probably was not in either DJing or promotion. I was never good at self-promotion. But luckily, our community didn't ostracize me. Again, it embraced me, and I continued to be a part of it until 9 years later, when I started in Grooves at about the age of 25, 26. So you're going to hear me say this word community about 50 more times in the next 10 to 15 minutes, because this is why we're all here. We live in this really unique community. We are timeless. We are global. We are always evolving and expanding. And this is something that every company in the world, no matter how big, just think of the largest companies you can, or the next generation companies, Web3 companies, that are just starting out. They all talk about building community, creating culture. We already have that. We've had it for generations. We have to take care of that. When I first joined Beatport at the end of 2017, I gathered the then 40 employees together, and I said, we have an obligation to fulfill our promises to this community and our promise as a company. So the work starts now. Fast forward 4.5 years, and we've more than quadrupled the size of the company in terms of employees and tripled the size of sales. We've also gone from selling 2 products to more than a dozen, and we couldn't have done this without the community. But there are other reasons why we were able to accomplish this. And I've narrowed it down to 5 reasons, 5 of the most important reasons. And these are really characteristics of our community that I wanted to highlight for you today, because I believe that if we all remember these characteristics, harness them, then we can emerge from this much more successfully and more healthy. So the first reason or characteristic is that we are gritty. Now, my team has heard me talk about grit frequently over the last 4.5 years. It's usually associated with toughness or resilience, but it's kind of a hard word to define. There's actually a really good YouTube TED Talk that talks about grit, and I would encourage you all to watch it. But grit is this determination, this willpower to not let failure get in your way of achieving positive impact on people around you and on your community. You have to have fortitude and willpower and stick with things. So grit, I didn't know that I had it, but when I started In Grooves, I couldn't have named the major record companies. I was just a fan of downloading music. I was a fan of dance electronic. I wanted to find a way to bring that music to the United States, where digital downloading was beginning to take off in 2002. And so I started the process of building that company. It took 7 years for us to achieve a level of success where finally we signed the largest record company in the world to use our digital supply chain. That was Universal Music Group. Another example is at Beatport, where when I started, it was a toxic work culture that had just emerged from bankruptcy. People were worried about their jobs, had to change the dynamic. That's not easy to do when you're dealing with human beings and their safety and their future. But we dug in, we started to change things, we hired the right people, and again, a few years later now, it's actually a place that people want to work again. So that's grit. The next characteristic of our community is that we are adaptable. So whether it is a promoter who's got a last-minute cancellation because the DJ missed their flight and you got to swap somebody else in, or you can't get into Bergheim, so you got to run home and dress in all black and then get back in line and not talk or breathe or look at anybody, we adapt. So we saw this during the pandemic when first weekend of March, Beatport was live streaming a in real life festival in San Diego with our partners at Twitch. And the next week, we were all on lockdown. It was just a few weeks after that we adapted as a company and turned our Twitch channel into a platform for DJs to perform live from their living room or studio or garden and stay connected with their fans. We had no idea how this would impact the industry. I think to date, we've done over 250 million streams of the content from those performances, and it really allowed our community to feel connected in an extremely difficult time for everybody. Compassionate. This is an incredibly important characteristic. We are much more compassionate than many, other industries. And I don't want to put them down, but there's a lot of, ruthless industries out there. We care about each other. We want each other to be successful, healthy. And this again showed itself during the pandemic when in these live streams, we actually ended up raising nearly $500,000 for mental health, to support companies that had seen their sales go to zero, and most recently, the tragic situation in Ukraine, which continues to unfold. So the other thing, there's actually I'm going to get a 2-for-1 here. Within compassionate, there's this word passion. And I don't think I've ever met a more passionate community than ours. And again, we've seen this in the last few years with the reaction to social justice and the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. I know our staff and everybody in the community, our partners that have stood up alongside us, are incredibly passionate about these causes, and that we understand we have to be leaders in change. And again, this is generational. This happened back in the 60s and 70s, and it's going to happen again in the next 10 to 20 years. We have to be leaders. We are innovative. This is critical to evolving. Willingness to change, improve. So again, I'll reference what we saw during the pandemic. incredibly difficult time. So what happened? We saw the emergence of new technologies and new ways to engage with fans. NFTs, non-fungible tokens, was one of the ways that electronic artists stayed connected and continued to innovate. I think it was 70% of all music NFTs were from electronic musicians. It's incredible. We also saw innovation in other areas. Companies were launched, I've seen a couple of different business plans, to help find money and make sure that independent artists and labels get money that is owed to them. And we've also seen technologies emerge that help improve the fan experience and reduce friction with ticketing. So there's been a lot of innovation during the last couple of years. But there is one area that I think we need to innovate more. And it ties to a statistic that I first heard in the first few days of joining Beatport that just absolutely shocked me. 95% of our customers back then were male. How does that make sense? Just look around the room here, look at any dance floor. There's got to be something that we're doing wrong. So at Beatport, there were operational things that we did and promotional to try to equalize things, and we have seen improvement, about a 60% improvement, up to 92%. But that's not even close to enough. There is no reason we can't reach gender parity. And that's our goal, and we're not going to stop until we reach that goal. But I want to invite all of the entrepreneurs in this room to come up with ideas for how we can improve that statistic and make young women and non-binary genders feel safe to be DJs and producers. And in fact, I'll put my money where my mouth is. We'll invest $100,000 in the next 60 days to the best idea that comes to my inbox. It's just Rob at Beatport. Okay? All right, so how do I know that we're going to do this? Because we've done it before. And we're going to do it again. We're going to emerge strong and healthy. And this is also a unique characteristic of our community. My generation, the generation above me, the generation below me, we understand that we need fresh ideas. That we want to help with innovation. We want to help bring those to life. We're not an industry that keeps people down. We want to hear voices from all corners of our community. And so this is really critical. And it's something that again we can rely on as a community. So these are the 5 characteristics that I have identified helped Beatport do so well during the pandemic. But I want to show you now a video montage, a visualization of this actually happening, so that when you leave here, you'll know that there's this entire community waiting for what you are going to give them. Okay? So we can't stop. The work starts now, right? So let's get out there and do it. So I hope you enjoy this video montage that the company put together. And 2 clicks. But
opportunity.
Now, it only took me 30 years to finally get good at self-promotion, but I needed the help of Beatport colleagues and Mark Knight. So anyway, thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. It's been great to be with you here today.